Now, I was recently thinking to myself about how people become radicalized, and so far gone as to not engage with ideas using anything less than a fist.
Are you assembling?
Can't really say I've ever heard of anything like that recently. Anyway, the majority of radicalized people don't really start out as radicals because, well, kids aren't politically savvy. Except, that one kid who you grew up with in grade school who'd watch late night talk shows and then go to school the next day and start telling jokes that he really doesn't understand. But anyway, while I was thinking about radicalism, I happened upon the idea that maybe it could be explained by an unbalanced view of the world driven by either ethos, logos, or pathos. Ethos is an appeal to ethics through the apparent credibility of a source. A person with good ethos is widely regarded as trustworthy and genuine. Typically, we balanced our trust in sources by using logos and pathos. For instance, information being given by a doctor or someone with a degree can, with relative certainty, be trusted because, well, logically it would follow that an expert knows more than a layman. In addition, pathos will balance ethos when listening to an unfamiliar source through just general intuition. Or, for all you Zoomers out there, a vibe check. Posture, tone, and demeanor all factor into your general gut feeling of a person within your first few minutes of meeting them. This can either fill you with skepticism or leave you completely enamored and believing someone without question, like you're some kind of cultist. Which happens to bring me on to my next point. What exactly does someone driven to extremism through ethos look like? Well, as I've already mentioned, cultists are a pretty great example of this because they're devoted to the will of their leader, believing that they have some kind of elevated status, and that gives them an unparalleled amount of credibility, and these cultists will follow their leader in whatever they say or do. Something similar could also be said for religious extremists, except instead of a mortal leader, they have blind faith in their God or something spiritual, and that their way of following a book or living is the one true way, and that all others should be punished. This fanaticism has led people to do extreme things across all of history that most of us would never think of. For instance, you've got like the murders of the Charles Manson family, or, most notably, the mass suicides of Jonestown. However, religious examples tend to be more varied than that. It's not nearly as cut and dry as a mass suicide or a couple murders. For instance, you have Buddhist monks that will self-mummify before dying, or self-immolation in the form of an extreme protest. And then, finally, there are some, let's just say more extreme actions that we aren't usually allowed to talk about. Unquestioning belief in the credibility of something extends far past a god or a spiritual leader, though. There is, let's say, a more familiar, more tangible example that I'm sure all of us would just love to calmly discuss without any animosity whatsoever. Politics. Now, if you ask me, voting exclusively for one party every single year without question, that's kind of cultish. And if you don't believe me, then go ahead, ask a diehard Democrat if they support a Republican's policies. But tell them that those policies came from a Democrat. Now, just watch them justify every single one. And after that, have fun revealing that those policies are actually a Republican's, and watch them scramble to figure out what went wrong and how they can go back on everything they just justified. That's already been done! Even worse is when people try to label you as any particular political party because you said something that hurt their feelings. Another fun group of cult-like people are the science lover crowd. No, I'm not talking about people who have an actual respect for the scientific method or people who just think innovation and tech is cool. No, I'm talking about these types of people. You know, the types of people who get up in your face and call you every name under the sun for questioning, or God forbid, disagreeing with the conclusions drawn by a single recent study. Not only do they have a fundamental misunderstanding of the way science works, but they also look like total idiots when months later they're loudly screaming in support about something they violently opposed a month ago. Science is constantly evolving, and you're supposed to question it. You're supposed to try and find a way to disprove what's been done before in favor of something that's more accurate. You can, and I'm not saying don't trust it, because obviously do trust it to a decent degree, but don't treat every new study like it's this concrete, infallible truth, unless you want to be the Gabby Douglas of mental gymnastics. And just remember, scientists can be paid off as easily as politicians can. Moving on, we have logos, which is an appeal to logic through the use of statistics and facts. Logic is usually the core of most arguments because truth is a far stronger foundation to build off of than an emotion. However, being obsessed with a logical appeal at the expense of ethics and emotions can lead you down a road of questionable morality. Many times in history, revolutions have happened because of a legitimate issue, but then they end up taking a nosedive because their leaders become hyper-focused on a single fact. Kind of like how communism set out to solve class disparity by ending capitalism, because in 1840s Europe the working class was struggling while the elites were sitting there eating cake. This massive gap in wealth just so happened to happen in a capitalist society, so obviously it's capitalism's fault and not the fault of anything else. However, when communism was actually implemented, it didn't really fix the issue. Because capitalism wasn't the problem. Authoritarian leaders also tend to follow this general idea of wanting to solve an issue, finding a single scapegoat to blame it on, and then gaining power, and then getting the ability to spend insane amounts of resources in order to see that one solution through. People motivated primarily by logos often get tunnel vision, and they pursue a single solution over all the ones that can exist. And it's easy to fall into this trap because once you're looking for something, you tend to become biased in favor of it. This line of thinking is also pretty consistent with people who view the world in a racial lens. They'll cram cherry-picked statistics down your throat all day and night, but try asking them a real question like, how much of an impact does generational wealth have? Or why aren't the statistics consistent throughout income levels? And you know what? Odds are they'll get flustered and angry at you and tell you to go away because you questioned their views. It's really not enough to shape your entire worldview over a couple statistics or facts. Because honestly, two things can be true at the same time, or sometimes neither of them. The world is made up of these incredibly complex systems, and it's genuinely naive to think that there's going to be a best or a right way to solve an issue, especially if you ignore the ethical and emotional consequences of your actions. So, I'd take a page out of Jurassic Park's book on this one, and every once in a while start asking yourself whether you should do something instead of only focusing on if you could. Finally, we arrive at Pathos. The appeal to emotion. Feelings are an incredibly important aspect of decision-making that often go overlooked. Fear and apprehension can keep you from putting yourself in harm's way or even dying. Desire and hope can keep you pursuing your goals or even surviving in the toughest of conditions. However, these emotions can become misplaced with irrational fears or overreacting in times of great stress. And in these situations, it really helps to have that logical base to anchor off of. Now, I would say children are a great example of a person who's governed entirely by emotion. From sunrise to sunset, children are entirely at the whim of the next chemical that happens to bounce through that empty skull of theirs. Playing with toys? Good! Happy! Mom tells you it's time to stop playing with toys? Don't like that. I'm pissed off. At the doctor and he's got a needle. No, please, don't hurt me, please. For kids, it really doesn't matter how they live their lives because their parents usually act as that center of control. But for adults, it's more important to learn how to emotionally regulate, or else you're going to end up with a lot of unintended consequences. For instance, you could eat whatever food you like every single day. Pizza for breakfast, pasta for dinner, no vegetables. Why not? Why not do that? Well, years down the line, it'll be unsurprising if you're a couple 100 pounds heavier and you've got all sorts of joint problems. What about smoking weed? Getting drunk? I mean, you're an adult. You can do that. Why the hell not? Being sober sucks. Well, keep doing that every day. You'll have liver problems, lung problems, and because you're avoiding sobriety so much, you'll become mentally weak when you actually have to deal with things sober. Now, I'm not saying never eat your favorite food or don't grab a drink with your friends, because in moderation, all those things are probably fine for you to do, even good. The point I'm really trying to make is that if you let your emotions control you, you won't have them in control when you need to rely on yourself. You know, it's kind of interesting how if you let Ethos, Logos, or Pathos be the driving force in your life without any balance to them, it ends up becoming kind of counterintuitive. Too much blind faith in the credibility of someone, and you'll end up completely ignoring the fact that they could be lying to you. If you believe in a fact or statistic too much, you can easily get tunnel vision, and then ignore the truth because you don't want to believe it. Run from your troubles by doing what feels good for long enough, and honestly, you'll end up looking in the mirror sooner or later feeling worse than you did before. At the start of the video, I mentioned how I came up with this idea because I was thinking about how people become radicalized. But I also think that this concept could work in reverse as well. People aren't listening to one another, and I think it's because they're not arguing from the same rhetorical foundation. After all, it's a lot harder to change someone's mind if you don't really understand where they're coming from. I think understanding that is honestly the most crucial step to making any meaningful change. For instance, in the West, the right tends to use logical arguments based off of data and statistics, whereas the left tends to base their arguments off of emotion, citing personal experience and struggle. And it makes sense that these compromises aren't being made because for one side it's, why should I listen to you? You haven't disproven my logic. And for the other it's, well, you're not paying attention to these people's suffering, so why should I care about what you have to say?
All right, Ben, I know you like to say facts don't care about your feelings, but I want to tell you some facts about your feelings.
There really is a lot that we have to work on, but there's also a lot we can solve together. But we just have to step off our high horses and meet beyond party lines. Otherwise, I'm sorry, but I think things will only get worse. Consider what I've said, and feel free to tell me your thoughts in the comments. Share this video if you think it was thought-provoking, and have an interesting day.